Hello, and welcome to Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore the imposter syndrome that haunts creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day to day lives. Hello.
Hello, I'm Greg, and that's Liz. And today, in lieu of our normally scheduled guest, you get us. And it's a little bit of a it's always nice to be here with you, Liz. But
Yes.
today's a little bit of a bittersweet day in that this is sort of our last episode, at least for the moment, as we go on an indefinite hiatus due to sort of workload and full plates and deadlines and responsibilities and so on and so forth. So it's nice to be here with you always, and it's nice to be able to put a little bit of a cap on what we've done thus far with the podcast, which looking back on in a little bit of a retrospective fashion, I'm really like thrilled with and very proud of what we've done thus far.
I mean, me too. We've done 60 interviews, which
Yeah.
seems crazy,
Hmm.
in about a year and a half, I believe.
That
We
sounds right.
started this
Yep.
6 months before Trust Issues was coming out.
Yep.
And I know we both listened to the first episode this week just to kind of get back to where we started.
Hmm.
And that was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Aside from the fact that I still like can't stand the sound of hearing my own voice.
Same.
it's it was I felt like I've learned a lot since that first episode.
Hmm.
And I think we really started this for all the reasons we said in that first episode, which was we wanted to connect with other creators about this feeling of imposter syndrome because we had heard from so many people that they were also having it. We also wanted to start to talk about trust issues and get prepared for that book tour and that release. I think self-serving, I really wanted to start to practice again, to just be like promoting.
Hmm.
And it kind of took a life of its own in the sense that I never thought, I don't know about you, that we would do this many episodes or go this long or get the kind of like positive feedback we have.
Hmm.
And it's been incredible.
Yeah. I think it's been sort of to the point of what one of the objectives was that leaning into that community and getting away from that sort of um, isolation uh,
Mhm.
that can come with the sort of endeavor that we've all endeavored to do in terms of writing and creative careers as well, creative practices. And so that's been really good. I think maybe the most gratifying aspect of it is just being able to be a part of that community and maybe bring some people together or just kind of like have be some small contributor to that kind of community and that support system and that sort of overall blanket of kind of the writer's life that we're all you know in it for, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, real talk, you know, I think one of the reasons that we're pausing is because I said to you, like, it's just, and I know you have a lot of writing you're doing as well. Like, it was just really hard to get the work life balance.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the bittersweet of this, is that I really came to find that, every week that we would be talking with someone, following, like leading up to the interviews, having the opportunity to read someone's book, learn about their career, if they weren't an author, just kind of see what they'd been doing to create in the world, and then having these incredible conversations that would be like inspiring and moving and reflective, and then not really having the time to put all of that energy into my own writing because I'm doing the mom thing, and I'm, working as a ghostwriter and an editor and a coach. And it was, I think a moment for me where I realized that one of the parts of this career we have that we didn't really talk that much about on the podcast is how hard it is to sustain yourself 100%
Mm.
with just writing books. Like
Yeah.
most, if not all of us, have to have some sort of side hustle or, supplementary something. And, while I wish our podcast had gone really big,
Sure.
and we could have, just lived off of the, copious amounts of advertising money, that's not what happened. Although, maybe we'll manifest that.
Sure.
So, yeah, I guess that was kind of a surprise to me that not more people talked about like how hard it is to just like make a regular living as a creative. And I think in the times we're facing right now, I don't know that that's going to get any better. What do you think?
I think that's true. I think that's true. I mean, I kind of, I think where I'm coming from, I think you're more practical minded about this as a career, maybe than I am.
Mm.
Um, I feel like I sort of have this almost naive whimsy about this. I kind of go into everything kind of like love of the game, sort of podcast included. I was like, oh, we'll
Right.
do this to do this, and I just want to write the books that I want to kind of write and do that. And I probably to my own detriment don't go into it necessarily with like a pragmatic approach with, oh, this is going to work for the market, or this is how we could build this thing in order to make it profitable. So
Right.
that there's a little of that. So I mean, yeah, but to your point also, compounding that is that with, the advent of AI and with sort of not as much emphasis on the arts and with NEA grants going out the window and things being pulled and the kind of, you know, climate we're living in, it doesn't, I think to your point, it's right. It's, you're seeing art for art's sake sort of being leveraged by a corporate mentality and more of a business head and late
Mm.
capitalism and all of those things. So it is getting a little more tricky, and it is becoming more of that thing. I am also surprised, as you are aware, I think coming into this um, industry a few years back, I sort of had this idea that like, oh, if you're writing books, you're probably just writing books, right? You're able to
Mm.
sustain yourself, or maybe at least I didn't realize how much of an uphill climb it often was for people to sustain themselves in a creative way. And sometimes people are able to do that. And, we've had a number of guests on, and it's always really, I always feel it gratifying to talk to people who end up sustaining themselves sort of still in the same sphere. A lot of people who are writing teachers, right, who are professors
Mhm.
in MFA programs and things like that. And that's um, I feel like one of the through lines with that is a number of the guests that we've had on have talked about how that sort of fills their bucket and gratifies them in much the same way that their own writing does, or it translates into their writing, or they're learning from their students and bringing that in, which again speaks to that sense of community that I think that we're trying to tap into, or we're curious about exploring.
Mhm.
But then, there are other situations where people are having to hustle 9 to 5 jobs, or, they're kind of hacking away at whatever to make a living to then be able to write on the side, which is also, writing then
Right.
becomes more of an outlet, and you're looking at it as more of maybe a release, or a sanctuary than you are looking at it in those practical, pragmatic terms, which maybe on its own has a little bit of an appeal to it in that sense as well. But I think to go back to your point, that it was surprising as it was as surprising to me as it was to you of how much people had to kind of make that writing
Right.
part of their career work, with a
Mhm.
lot of other, a lot of other kind of, negotiations, if you will.
Right. Well, and I think it says a lot and speaks a lot to the state of the publishing industry and how writers, authors who have penned multiple books to varying degrees of success are really held against their backlist
Mm,
sales track
yep.
as opposed to their talent or their loyal fan base, or it's speaking about that kind of capitalist mentality
Mhm.
versus artistic, or activist, or any of the other reasons that we create art and write books.
Mhm.
It really puts writers in a corner. I think we've been a little bit in that corner,
Mhm.
where in deciding whether we're going to write a fifth book,
Right.
because we had, we had a really, really lucky kind of, lottery like entry. We got a big book advance for 2 books,
Right.
and that was huge. And we both realized it and
Yeah.
certainly didn't take it for granted. And by no means am I complaining about that. Um, but what did happen is because of that advance, and we had like top level, amazing book tour, all the marketing, all the
Hmm.
stuff.
Sure.
But our book did not earn out. It did
Right.
not sell through. It did
Right.
not live up to the expectations of the publisher.
Right.
And that happens with most books.
Right.
It happens with most debuts. It happens with many, second, third books, if authors even get to do a second or third book.
Right.
And in our case, and I think with so many others, if you have a really like big debut and it doesn't do immediately well, like it doesn't hit the list, it doesn't get all the things right away,
Yeah.
you know, publishers have to move on to the next.
Right.
Bookstores have to move on to the next, and it it really creates this tension between, you know, what are we worth? Like what are we worth
Right.
as authors and writers in, the book industry?
Yeah.
And how do you continue to write books and be discovered? And I think part of this conversation too, a lot of our guests touched upon, if you write one genre,
Hmm.
you you don't really have the freedom to jump into another one if you have done well in that one genre.
Right.
you know
Right. Sure.
I think we had multiple authors share that like they'd wanted to write in a different, genre or even POV, and their agents and editors were like, no,
Yeah.
no, like why are you fixing it if it ain't broke?
Right. Although I will say it's interesting to see though now, and I don't know if this is just because things have become, I don't know, I don't know enough about the market necessarily to make assumptions about this, but it does seem like some people who have been successful in certain genres, if those genres sales wise overall are starting to kind of ebb, there's a little bit
Sure.
more leeway. I mean, a lot of people there are a few authors who that we know who have worked previously in thriller and mystery now are moving more into speculative and fantasy because there's an uptick
Yeah.
in those sales. And so it's almost like I don't know if this is again the editors, the publishers who makes those decisions on the kind of ground level, but it seems like there's recently a little bit more willingness to let an author take a swing if it's in something that seems more kind of commercially viable. So you are
Sure.
having some, but then of course, you wonder how much of that is the author, how much of that is the author's sort of pure intent, and how much of that is sort of trying to, play to markets and be sensible in a sort of business, you know, business acumen sensibility.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, how have you been doing or feeling about your solo projects and writing, in light of all of this? Like taken, the release of Trust Issues and how that went.
Hmm.
When we first recorded the episode 1, you shared that you hadn't sold your first solo novel.
Right.
We've had 60 plus hours now
Yeah.
of conversations,
Yeah.
and I was super humbled by the number of guests who had unsold novels
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
their journey.
Yeah.
So I know how it's been affecting me. I'm curious about for you.
Sure. Okay. I'll go first and then you can follow up.
Okay.
Well, I'm happy. I'm happy to announce that as of this recording, I now haven't sold my second solo novel.
Mm.
So that's sitting in a drawer as well. And I think what gets in my head about this, speaking of, going back now to the imposter syndrome and all of those things that bounce around inside your skull as you're, trying to go to sleep and have any quiet moment that the day presents, is that now I have 2 reasons to doubt myself doubly since the
Mhm.
first episode. Um, I mean, my assessment of that is I know with both of these books, I'm trying to write into the moment in terms of socially and politically and things like that. And it may be that that is not exactly the way to do things. As I mentioned a few moments ago, people are looking for, I think, a lot more escapism these days. Um,
Mhm.
so you've got speculative, you have fantasy, romantasy, things like that. And I understand that in a when you have a tense moment when things are really everyone feels like they're kind of back up back up against the wall. I think a lot of readers um, want to look towards something escapist. You know, they want to get out
Yeah.
of the real world for a moment, which is completely understandable. Um, so again, part of that goes back to I think I'm just writing the thing that I want to write because that's what's on my mind and that's what I'm trying to process in the moment. And I'm probably not doing that very tactfully in terms of a from a commercial perspective.
Yeah.
However, I'm also, as I mentioned to you, working on book number 3, which is a yet another solo endeavor. This one is a little more style forward, and I'm doing a little more genre heavy. So I think what I'm going to be able to do with this one, I'm hoping, is to still address some of the issues that I addressed in the first two, but make it a little bit more, uh, a little more style heavy, a little more kind of fun, lead with a little more humor, and make it kind of escapist, and then work some of the rest of that stuff in a little more sneakily, and we'll see if that
Mhm.
works. But yeah, I mean, throughout this whole process, it's always just that thing of, you know, the doubt is always there, and then it's how do you kind of, I don't know, navigate it. So there's that. What's been your kind of,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
take on it
well, I'm
on your work and go
curious.
through?
Well, just keeping it on you for a minute, because
Sure.
I think this is really, it's always really helpful for me when we talk about this stuff. And it's always super clarifying, I think, I mean, this is how you and I have always been, I think, in our friendship and our, you know, writing partnership. Like, your ability to, kind of take the information from having gone through the process of selling or not being able to sell two novels and then moving on to a third and using that information in like a productive way and not in like a destructive way. I
Mm,
love that about you as a human and as a writer. And I think that, you mentioned like naive whimsy earlier in the conversation, but I also think that it's not naive and it's not whimsy. I think it's like a choice you're making
right.
every day that you wake up to write again.
Hmm.
And maybe it's not even a choice actually. Maybe it's just that you are so moved to write and tell stories and these stories are living in you that that voice is louder than the imposter syndrome
Mm,
and the self-doubt. And so I'm amazed by that. And I'm so glad you're continuing to write because I feel really angry that there are good books that aren't selling. I know both of your books are totally sellable and wonderful and readable,
thank you.
but I also know how the industry works.
Right. Right.
And I am sure that your track record with me
Hmm.
affected those books not selling. That brings us right back to the sales track thing, but it's
Sure.
just that there's this like narrow kind of method
Hmm.
that gets used at publishers, and I understand it because I was part of it, and
Right.
I feel guilty about it to an extent. It's there are definitely editors and publishers who are acquiring new voices and books that are different and that are risks, that they don't at the face of them seem like this is going to make us a lot of money, but we can build this author.
Yeah.
But there's a lot less of that than there used to be.
Okay.
It's more about what did this author do previously? What can we compare this to? And where will it sit on the shelf?
Right.
And
Right.
there's lots of other things that go into that, but essentially it's that because they need to like determine how much they can pay for the book, how much it will potentially make,
Sure.
etc.
Sure.
That's the reality of it. But then on the other side, there's like lots of writers who write beautiful, important, needed books, both needed for them to get out
Hmm.
and needed for readers to find and read.
Sure.
And I think that a lot of careers are stalled early because the business aspect of it like crushes people.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, sure. I mean,
And do you feel it when you're sitting down now for the third novel? Are you thinking about it?
yeah, I mean, just to get a, you know, to I'll give you my whole kind of, I guess, overall broad view of how things work with art. I think art, you know, that art versus commerce thing, that sort of
Yeah.
always battling art versus commerce. I think that we're moving as a culture and globally more towards corporatism. And I think the thing with corporatism and the corporate mentality is that the individual is essentially operates as an inconvenience to the corporate mindset, because the individual is something that you know, the idea of the corporate mentality is that you're then able to not have to worry about people on an individual level, right? I mean, it sort of gets rid of that consideration because you're looking at bottom lines and you're just looking at groups and sort of these anonymous swaths of people rather than individuals. I think what art does in society, and the reason why it's so important, and also probably the reason why it's become more and more undervalued in recent years, is because art, you know, in its sort of just in its conception and execution, engenders empathy and compassion in human
Mm.
beings, which brings the individual to the forefront of our kind of consciousness, right? I don't think from the way that societally we are looking at things for that reason, I think that that really becomes a hindrance and an inconvenience more so. So I think that art is being less and less prioritized these days, even than it has been in, you know, recent decades. And for that
Mhm.
reason, this is a circuitous answer to that, but I am thinking about that anytime I sit down to write. That's somewhere in the back of my head. So I'm also like, if I feel compelled to write something, I'm going to write that rather than try to look at something in terms of where I can place this thing or what the market is or how to kind of gauge it toward what's hot at the moment. You know, there's
Mhm.
that kind of thing. And I think that goes back to what you were saying before. It's like I just usually end up writing the thing that I feel compelled to write. The books that you and I have written together tended to have sprouted out of something that was happening maybe in the news or in the real world, or in a few cases things that were happening in our individual lives or people that were dear to us that we wanted to explore,
Yeah.
to either give it more visibility or to work through the kind of inner workings of the psychology and the emotional sort of resonance that it had for us as well. So I mean, I think that to a certain extent we both lead from that
Mhm.
kind of seed of an idea. But I think that it becomes, in the world that we're living in, more and more maybe challenging to just write from a pure place in terms of getting the book sold. So I guess I'm just going to write again. It goes back to, I'm just going to kind of write what I want to write, and I hope that it's going to go well. And again, that's probably not practical or pragmatic, but it's kind of what I'm compelled to do.
Yeah, and I don't think that practical and pragmatic are elements that writers need to have in their mind when they're actually creating. I think
I
those
agree. Yeah,
are, you know, they're contrary to the creative process.
agreed. Yeah,
And and this is where I wish I could like, you know, get that Men in Black like memory eraser thing
right.
for everything I know about the industry, because the more I don't want to say the more I work with other clients who are kind of at the beginning of their journey, but a
Mhm.
lot, I have a lot of conversations with people about, and I write proposals and I talk to them about what agents they should be pitching. So I'm thinking a lot about the business
Right.
in my day to day, and what that does when I sit down at the desk and look at what I've written
Hmm.
is immediately have that self-doubt voice saying like, where the fuck are they going to shelve this? Like,
Hmm.
who's going to read, like, how is our agent even going to describe? And it's those voices, and this is like the cognitive dissonance, we talk about that a lot on
Sure.
this podcast. Like, my heart always knows that I am happiest and most centered and serene, with the exception of being with my, my family,
Right.
when I'm writing
Yeah.
and when I'm in the flow. You know, that's just for me, that's happiness.
Yeah.
And it's sanity.
Yeah.
But the battle between knowing that that space exists and then the layer upon layer of, like, the business of it all, or the voices, the self-doubt, that really weighs heavily. And I think that what has been so incredible about these interviews, and what I've come to realize, I'm probably stating the obvious, is that the only, like, antidote to that
Mm-hmm.
is just to have this conversation
Mm-hmm.
over and over and over.
Right.
you know
Right.
like,
Right.
knowing that I'm not alone in feeling this way.
Yeah.
And even if my version of sitting down and struggling with all of that kind of inner self-doubt is different than yours, I mean, you seem to have a really kind of clear delineation between, like, what you know and understand about the world at large versus what you need to do to tell the stories you want.
Mm-hmm.
um, we're both saying we feel the imposter syndrome, we feel,
Sure.
the self-doubt. But I'm curious, that, like, what was surprising in some of the interviews we did, either about, like, what people were saying, or what you kind of took away? Like, did any of your viewpoints get shifted or changed in the course of this?
I'm sure they did over the course of, like, in subtle ways and larger ways. I mean, it was interesting sometimes to talk to someone who maybe worked in a particular genre but felt like a real draw to other genres, or a sort of, you know there was, like, people who wrote really really well in whatever the, we talked to a lot of thriller writers. Certainly we talked to some
Mhm.
people who were outside the thriller world, but people who worked in that genre really well, but then also, you know had maybe come up in, like, MFA programs, had come up reading in, like, reading classical works of English and things like that, and had this real grounding in that. And I think part of that, again, is you make these sort of assumptions sometimes, and I'm guilty of that, of, like, there is that. I mean, this has come up quite a bit on the podcast and in our conversations and talking to other authors, where there is a little bit of a disconnect between what you would call literary fiction and genre fiction. And I feel
Mhm.
that sometimes, it's hard to kind of, maybe it goes back to ego as well. It's hard to keep sometimes your ego out of that thing of, like, oh, well, that's just genre fiction, versus, well, that's, literature, or that's literary fiction, or that's that kind of thing. And I have to say, it was actually refreshing and heartening to have conversations with people who were working in genre fiction, doing that very well, and weren't necessarily working with that sort of, and sometimes you do have the imposter syndrome with that too, but people
Mhm.
who seemed at least very content working in that space, and not necessarily having, like, what I might um, assume would be some sort of resentment or chip on their shoulder about not having the kind of recognition or accolades that come with, like, a more of a literary consideration. So that was
Mhm.
that was very cool. That was cool to see that. Also, I mean, it's just interesting to see or hear people who work. We know them as authors, but then they have these very rich, varied lives outside of that. And
Yeah.
sometimes these are things that find their way into their work, and sometimes these are things that they just do to, like, decompress from their work, or get outside of the headspace to be able to recharge, to come back to their creative work. And it's always that thing, I get, and that speaks to just, the layers of people that we sometimes don't glimpse or get to know, or have the chance to know. So I also feel like with this podcast, I feel very fortunate that we had a chance to really dig into some of those layers with some folks that we might not know. We might only know nominally, or we may not have known in real life before that. And now I feel like we have, a better understanding of that.
Right. And I think that's also because certainly with genre writers, but I think most writers now, unless you're in a very small percentage, get the kind of exposure, publicity where people really do like profiles anymore or
Right.
do extended reviews.
Yeah.
So I was like very excited. A lot of our interviews, like when we stopped recording,
Mhm.
guests would be like, "You asked so many questions we've never been asked before,"
Mhm.
which was crazy because some of our author guests had written, like a dozen books,
Sure.
or, people having opportunities to really talk about something other than, the five typical questions
Right.
thriller writers get asked, which are great. And I'm not shitting on that because
Yeah.
any featuring of authors and writers is great.
Yeah.
It's discoverability for readers. But I think that there is yeah, there were a lot of moments where I was like, wow, there's such a difference like across the board in how people approach the craft,
Mhm.
in how they entered into it. We had so many guests who had started out with completely different careers,
Yeah.
you know people who were teachers or journalists or in software
Yeah.
or you know therapists. It
Yeah.
kind of ran the gamut, and they all kind of came to it in different ways, but then there was still that kind of universal feeling of, I mean, especially those, yes, those authors who didn't necessarily start out saying like I'm going to be a writer or
Mhm.
go get an MFA. They like had an entirely different path, and then they decided somewhere along the way they were going to finally write that novel.
Right.
They all were like, yeah, the imposter syndrome is very real,
Mhm.
because they're like jumping into another thing completely.
Yeah.
That was really cool to kind of hear about. Yeah, people midstream deciding like I'm going to write a book.
Right. Which kind of goes back to your point a few minutes ago about it being, in a lot of cases, it's sort of the passion over the practicality. I mean, if you're doing something else and you feel compelled to, you have the story inside that you want to get out, or you have maybe, in some cases, we've had guests who had gone through sort of personal traumas and needed an outlet for that, and that led to them putting words on paper. So that's definitely that's a compelling thing too. That's very heartening, I think, to hear those stories. If,
Right.
if if I may just bounce back and sort of
Mhm.
turn your question from a few minutes ago back on you. I'm curious because, again, I'm sort of in here just slugging away with the stories that come to me at any given moment. But with you, as you mentioned, you're ghostwriting, you're working on things for clients and also writing your own stuff. So how do you sort of get out of that practical writing coach, ghostwriter brain, former, industry brain of looking at how saleable things are, marketable, who's the right fit for what in terms of editors and agents and houses and things like that, to going back to just the sort of the purity of your own creativity? How are you able to kind of channel back into that for yourself when you have the time to do that for you?
Not very successfully, I'm afraid. I wish, when we were doing the first episode, when I was listening back, I was like thinking, wow, what a naive little dipshit I was, thinking that like by this time I would have finished this novel. Sorry, listeners, if this episode's going to be riddled with with curses. Um, I think that I've been really lucky and really blessed to have gotten a lot of work this year,
Hmm.
referrals, return clients, and just, a surprising kind of uptick in people who want to finish books. They've been writing for a long time or needed their books to be rewritten, or they wanted to finish their memoirs.
Hmm.
And that has been incredible because it's kind of filled both things. I've been able to practice writing and editing and still work with authors and have conversations about books and writing, and then also be able to have a livelihood in
Yeah.
the industry that I love.
Yeah.
um, the the biggest obstacle I've come up with is, you know, I haven't been making time for my own stuff in a really meaningful way because that brain, my writing brain, my creative brain, is really burnt out after a day of working on someone else's book.
Okay.
And all I want to do is, bedtime, bath time,
Hmm.
see my son and my husband, and then like watch TV.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm like hesitant to admit that, but I feel like a lot of people go through this. It's just the burnout.
Yeah.
Um, but then I have these like middle of the night downloads, or I see or hear something, or, a lot of times like I'll be listening to a song when I'm editing and I'll have a flash of things I want to put into my book. And I've got, a notes file in my phone, like so many of us do, that's just like miles long.
Yeah.
And it's like the bank. I keep banking stuff,
Yep.
but I haven't actively been writing. And I've definitely written more in this book since that first episode. There are more words in there, but I don't know that they make sense or they're good. And I just am trying to use a lot of the wisdom that I've heard, in these 60 episodes to remind me that, there is not one way to do this,
Hmm. Right. Right.
writing thing. This book will come out of me when it's time.
Hmm.
Um, I think a lot of it has to do with just bandwidth and like realistic time management. And the other big part is that, and this came up with multiple guests because I was listening and looking back. Like, do I have the right to tell this story?
Yeah.
Factors in for me a lot.
Yeah.
And like across the elements of the book, and one of the like the big things is like it's not a thriller.
Hmm.
So again, it's like, do I have any business writing something that is attempting to be somewhat literary? Or
I'm going to weigh in quickly. Absolutely.
oh, thank you. but
Come on.
but there is that, imposter syndrome, just of trying to step out of what I've already established myself as.
Sure.
So there's that.
Yeah.
There's writing about recovery because, there have been a number of books in recent years where people have written about recovery pretty specifically.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of backlash. I know I've talked to you about this.
For sure.
I feel self-conscious about that. Writing about, Ireland and Irish ghost stories,
Hmm.
um, I was not born in Ireland. I have, Irish lineage, but I feel like there's a big responsibility when you're writing about another culture to get it right.
Sure.
And there are so many Irish writers that I admire and revere, and I don't want to fuck it up.
Right.
So I often have this like thought, maybe like twice a day, like maybe I should just put this in the drawer and start something else that feels easier.
Okay. Well, let me.
So that's kind of where I am.
Well, let me. I'm going to go ahead right now and use your own words against you.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Good. You'll be excited for this. So, having gone back as we both did, and you mentioned this at the top of the show, we went back and listened to the first episode, and one of the things that you say that you quite astutely point out in that first episode is that one of your kind of hallmarks of your version of imposter syndrome is that you over prepare. So I have to imagine that, knowing what you're trying to kind of bite off in terms of this story, in terms of it having a different genre, in terms of you writing about a place that you're not from specifically, and so on and so forth, I have to imagine that in this case, your imposter syndrome is going to serve you quite well in the amount of research you do, in your insistence in terms of getting the voice right and getting the setting right, and really making sure that that is all there. So this may be a situation where your imposter syndrome actually serves the work.
Thank you.
Throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, that's really encouraging. Thank you. And no, I think there is that's where also the kind of overthinking
Sure.
analysis paralysis, like perfectionism that many of our guests shared about too. This
Mhm.
kind of like, when can you let it go?
Yeah.
When do you let it go?
Yeah.
And there were a lot of craft things along the way that were so helpful for me to hear that I still like keep in my pocket,
Hmm.
and what I'm just thinking, one of those was kind of research versus, story.
Yes.
And um there's both are important,
Yeah.
and finding that balance is really critical,
Yeah.
and not getting too caught up in the like preparation or research of it all, and like just really investing in the story and the characters.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting thing too. I think of that often as, research is super helpful towards a story until it's not, until it becomes a hindrance, until you rely on it, and it becomes a crutch of like, well, I can't start writing this story until I know every single aspect of this story. And I think that's where the fear comes in, that natural fear that I think every writer has in some capacity,
Right.
of, can I write this story? Should I write this story? And maybe what I'll do is I'll just keep researching this thing until the story writes itself, kind of thing. But it does,
Yeah.
but it's as so many things are, there is that delicate balance that needle that you have to thread, in order to take the leap to actually write a book. And in some cases, that is knowing when you have enough research to start the book and not continuing to, you know, dig into that research hole until it becomes so monumental that, you never write the book. Um,
Right.
yeah, no, there's something to that. Sure.
Well, along those lines, and kind of back to your point of view, one of the I'm going to say that and then I'm going to talk about myself, but
Sure.
I'm going to relate it back to this. One of the, I would say, the biggest obstacles I have finishing my project is I don't want to have worked on this for as long as I have
Right.
and cared about it as much as I have to um, have it be rejected.
Sure.
And that is counter to all of the advice I've given clients, which is don't focus on the outcome, write the best book you can.
Mhm.
It's the journey, not the destination. I don't say it like that, but in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And I believe that. I do believe that it is the process.
Yeah.
But my question for you is, being on the other side of having written two novels and them not selling,
Yeah.
do you regret writing those novels? Do you feel a certain way about only a few lucky people having been able to read those? Like, where does that
Well,
sit for you? Do you have that hindsight?
yeah. I mean, it's interesting you bring that up specifically about the few readers that I've had on those. Um, in both of those cases, with both of those books, what I've done is I've, asked a few, readers, who have been generous with their time, you included, and a small handful of other people included, to be early readers on those. I've had, and these are, I mean, the reason I'm asking these specific people is because I have a great admiration and respect for their work as writers, and so I feel like these are the people that I want to get feedback from. And again, they have been
Mm.
generous, and selfless enough to do it. And so on some level, this goes back to that kind of love of the game approach. It's like, on some level, the fact that readers that I greatly respect have been so kind of, complimentary about the work, on some level, that's like, I can take that and think, okay, cool. Like, on some level, I've done it. Right.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would love for those books to sell at some point. Obviously, I would love for them to have some sort of life in print down the road. And maybe in one case, I think it might be a timing issue. In another case, the first one I actually have now, uh, converted into a screenplay, and I'm hoping to maybe do something in that forum, right? But,
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, I want to sell all of the stuff that I write. I'd love for everything to go really well. But also, on some level, just the fact that people whose work I respect, you have, given me the feedback they've given me on that basic kind of, I don't know, just accomplishment level, feels very, very
Mm.
good. So I
Mm.
think that I'd like to think that on some level I can just take that and let that be the thing that it is, if nothing further happens with those books. And also, I mean, part of it is just from a
Mhm.
practical standpoint. If even if nothing does happen with those books, they've been really good practice to be able to write whatever I'm going to be able to write next, right? I mean, I think with each book, I think with the books that we've written together, right? I don't know if you feel this way. Each book, I think we've gotten better on a particular skill set. You know, we've maybe, you know, gotten to write character a little more deeply, or we've been able to like figure out mechanics a little better, or atmosphere, or whatever it is. And so I don't think, you know, and to the point of a lot of our guests who had 3 or 4 books in a drawer before they got their first one published, right? Those were the books that
Mhm.
gave them the skill set and the mechanics to be able to get the first one published. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I don't think that's ever a waste. And again, part of it on some level, I'm writing just to sort of try and keep my head together on any given day too. So from a
Mhm.
therapeutic standpoint, it's useful to have written those books. From a practice standpoint and a craft standpoint, it's useful to have written those books. And then
Yeah.
also, I very much in my day-to-day life am always looking at this idea of control that I think
Mm.
most people are grappling with or trying to navigate in certain ways. And for a long time, I've tried to embrace the idea that control is very much an illusion, and there's very little that we can control. And so we, you know, can do the things that we do and prepare the things in the ways that we do, but ultimately the control is up to a number of other things. And so I think also it's a good exercise in continuing to embrace the idea of just seeding the illusion of control,
Mm.
you know.
Just you mean the process of writing? I
Well,
would
I
love
just
this. I
mean,
want to understand it more.
well, a bit of, yeah, the process of writing one, but also what happens with the final product. I mean,
Right.
your initial question of like, if, you know, if this
Yeah.
thing gets published or not, it really, ultimately, that's not really, I mean, what's in my control is to write the best book possible.
Mhm.
What's not in my control is what happens with that manuscript once it's turned in to whoever, right? But also,
Right.
and this is something I've been thinking about in terms of a practice and craft thing more recently, is the idea, and I think that the way that you and I have written our books together has been wonderful for this, in that, you know, I'll write a chapter, kick it over to you, and I have no control what's going to happen with chapter 2. You know, you're writing that
Right.
back. So it also, in that volley improv style that you and I have written together, I think that's been a wonderful lesson in terms of writing as well, in that oftentimes when you go into writing, you might have an expectation of what's going to happen, but then oftentimes that expectation will change because something else drops in the middle of it. You know, you're in a flow state and things are going well, and something jumps in, and suddenly you're like, oh, wait a minute, I can throw that in there. And so that becomes,
Right.
you know, the more you're able to embrace that, and the more you're able to necessarily put aside whatever pre expectation you had going into the writing that day or that week or that section of the book, oftentimes you get a richer story from it if you're able to seed that idea of control and give over to the thing that drops in sort of unannounced in the middle of it. You know, it's you
Mhm.
welcome you you welcome that guest in, and you know, sometimes that's the best part of the evening. So
Yeah.
I think in both, so in both a creative and a like practical commercial or business sense, I think that control turns up in both, and the more you're able to dispel with that notion, oftentimes the better the thing ends up being, you know.
So I can't even give you a good response to that because it was so wise, and I really appreciate that. Yeah, no, I think remembering that, just surrendering to the powerlessness
Yeah.
of any outcome, but especially that one. That I guess what you've just laid out is the perfect retort to knowledge of the industry. Like, yeah, so
Right.
lots of great books never get bought, and lots of shitty books sell millions of copies. And there, I said it. I'm not going to name names,
Nope.
but we all know
Sure.
we all know it.
We all have our version
And
of that. Sure. Yeah.
yeah, and um yeah, letting go of the outcome is really, that's a really good reminder.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, once again, it was, if not for writing with you, I don't know that I would have been able to really wrap my head around that concept in the same way that I
Mm.
tried to over the course of now writing, 4 books with you. So that is very much, that was a big contributor to just being able to like get into that headspace in the first place. So
Mm.
thank you right back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've been asked multiple times
Mm-hmm.
when our next book is coming out.
Mm, right.
um, which is a hard question to answer because we don't really know.
No.
And and I'm, you know, I definitely think there are more books in our future.
Yeah.
I know that we have a, in my opinion, a really fun, good idea for another book and an outline.
Same.
Um, but as forementioned, we have to kind of figure out what the best scenario for our next book is.
Exactly.
So, how has it been for you to just kind of like focus on your solo career with our joint, career as like a question mark? And, you just mentioned the kind of like ability to the volley, that we
Mhm.
do, the sending a chapter and letting it go. We had that like regularly for
Yeah.
years now.
Yeah.
And we haven't had that, which is probably why I'm destabilized because
Right.
I'm codependent on our partnership in that
Sure.
respect. But do you imagine this is a lot of questions in one, but
Mhm.
yeah, what do you see for the future?
Well, I mean, I always love writing with you. I almost feel like the solo stuff in some ways is like some side project stuff until you and I get to write again together. I mean, because it's so foundational to my writing career. So I almost feel like,
Mhm.
I mean, even, and this came up actually on our first, I'm realizing this came up on our first episode. The way I started even writing the solo stuff was during pandemic, because I think I was just trying to look for that stability of being able to sink into a story on a regular basis. And because of the way we write, because I'll write a chapter and kick it over, there are days at a time that I'm not actively working on that story. And so what I had a seed of an idea, and I just started writing that on essentially my days off from our our joint project.
Yeah.
And so really what I've done is I've just kind of filled in the gap of you and I not working on a book by then just working on my own stuff each day. But also I think that leaves me open to being flexible for the time that, it does make sense for you and I to jump into that again. And I agree. I think it's a great concept. I think the next book that we would do is great for a couple of reasons. A, it's a great story on its own. B, it also does thread thematically a little bit off of our last book as well. And so
Mm.
there's almost, we had our first 3, which are a little bit of a loose trilogy. I mean, more anthology than sequels, but we had the detective characters that kind of were the through line with that. And with this one, we had a con story um, on,
Hmm.
on the last one, and this one will be a different sort of con story. So there's a thematic element that runs through, even though it is its own standalone separate story. So, I mean, yeah, I love that story. I'd love to write it. And we now going back to the sort of bridging the creative with the practical, when makes the most sense for us to do that. And that will be some combination of our individual workloads, what we want to do with
Hmm.
those stories. You have client responsibilities, and then also when it makes sense in terms of from a business um, saleability, release calendar type of timing aspect. So there are a number of those things I think that kind of play into it. But yeah,
Yeah.
so that's been the way I've been able to answer your initial question. The way I've been able to do it, I've essentially just transitioned. I've taken this, it's the same amount of time. It's just that I've now been working on solo stuff versus the stuff that you and I have or had been co-writing and will, continue to at some point.
I find it harder to write solo. What's your experience?
I also do because, and we've talked about this before, there's not the built-in accountability mechanism that I think
Yeah.
both of us, that works for both of us. I mean, I will say I've gotten, just through repetition and practice, I've gotten a little bit more accountable to myself just by sitting down, just by making the kind of decision to sit down every morning in the chair and say, okay, I'm going to start writing now. And there are, little tricks and things here and there that help with that. Consistency can be helpful. Sometimes just saying,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm going to sit in this, I'm going to be at the desk by, 10 a.m. And then you're at the desk, and then you're sitting there. So you might as well start typing something and see what happens. I mean, there's a little bit of that. And then,
Yeah.
gradually that builds a habit. And I mean, I know you were saying that you haven't had necessarily the time and energy to be able to work on your stuff because you are now working on things for clients. But do you find that having that sort of consistency at the desk is helping you just in terms of the consistency of your practice?
Yes. And the thing that I'm realizing, it's such a gift, is I am, especially when I'm editing or I'm doing like a book doctoring situation. And, those are generally scenarios where people who are not writers have sat down and written, 80 or 150,000 words of a story idea, and they maybe weren't, familiar with like story structure and arc, and, so I come in and I can kind of chisel away and shape it. And that has been hugely beneficial, that even when I'm not writing my own stuff, if I'm working on the mechanics or character development or, polish, it, basically anything in the realm of helping a book become better. And even with proposals, because that's really about like homing in on what the idea is and saying it
Mhm.
succinctly, which is a challenge for me, as people who listen to this podcast know. It so I do feel in my daily work hugely grateful that people trust me with their work,
Mhm.
and also that I'm training and I'm practicing and I'm working at that every day. Whereas when I was in house and I was not really in like an editorial capacity, I was more in a sales and marketing and publishing. I didn't get to use that part of my brain,
Right.
and the
Right.
creative person in me was always like, feeling a little bit locked in
Mhm.
because I was having to think more about the business of it.
Right.
Um, so I think that my hope and plan is I'll have a little more time in the coming months and I can kind of sit down and look at the manuscript, in a new way,
Yeah.
and look at it like it's something that a client has brought me, and maybe have some
Mm.
objectivity
Okay.
and look at it in a way that's like, okay, what needs to happen to make this better? Does
Okay.
it need to be about the characters or the story or the structure? So I'm committing to, we've talked about doing some episodes in the future. We'll do some kind of one-offs, quarterly.
Mhm.
We don't really have a schedule yet. It's going to be kind of as we can. The next episode that we record, I will have a positive update,
I love it. I love it.
even if it's that I've just done more work on it.
Yeah, that's positive.
But yeah. So, do you feel like we succeeded in what we set out to do with the podcast?
I think so. I mean, we had a sort of a loose idea going, and I think the one thing that we didn't really do too much of was the third, which was the idea that we would potentially get people in to talk about their own
Yeah.
experiences with imposters, which not everyone necessarily has that, or if they do, if it's someone who is talented enough, then they weren't aware of it along the way, and therein lies the rub, right? We
Right.
had a couple, not very many, but it that I don't think ever was, nor did it end up being detrimental to the podcast or anywhere near the crux of what the conversations were. I think that, again, that idea that you came up with, that concept of the imposter syndrome, uh, flow through of the episodes was such a brilliant way to just get creatives who have some version of that into the flow of conversation, and just to open up conversations in some ways that we didn't necessarily anticipate. And I feel like that
Yeah.
was really a big success. And I think ultimately the success of being able again to do a small part in fostering that sense of community in what can be a kind of an isolating practice or profession or endeavor was really beautiful. So that was to me
Yeah.
the big takeaway. And again, continuing as we were just talking about, we haven't had a chance to write together, so this has been a really nice maybe placeholder or just
Hmm.
continuation of having that creative space. You know, we got to be friends because we were readers and viewers of similar things, and we had grown up with similar books, and we're drawn to similar things. And over the course of this run, we basically every week had the opportunity to read great books by authors, some who we knew, some who we didn't, and able to really break those books down and see how those books spoke to us and hit us on an emotional level, in addition to the craft piece and all of that stuff. And that's been a wonderful, if for nothing else, it's been a wonderful continuation of our friendship, our creative partnership, and just an excuse to hang out with you once a week. You know,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
yeah,
All of those things.
yeah,
And hearing regularly from people who have reached certain levels of success on this,
yeah,
in their careers, coming on the show saying that that has not helped their imposter syndrome
yeah,
was so helpful, and I feel like
yep,
was one of our aims, right? We
yeah,
kind of had that,
yeah,
we knew that going in,
yeah,
from knowing people who had a lot of success and still felt it and wanted to come on the show, but hearing people really talk about that and solidifying the understanding that, like, you can be a many time over bestseller,
yeah,
and that's not the solution
right,
to getting, rid of your imposter syndrome. The healing comes from talking about it,
yes, yeah,
and hearing,
yeah,
hearing what people have been going through.
yeah, yeah. Well, that seems like as good a place as any to wrap up for now. For
Yes,
now.
for now.
And to all of our listeners and viewers, we have loved having you along for the ride. Thank you for tuning in. It's been wonderful for us. I hope you have gotten, some beautiful stuff out of this as well. And Liz, you and I will put a pin in it for the time being. And again, we'll be back at least in the spring, and we'll see going forward from there. But it's been wonderful to do this with you. I love you. We are,
Yes.
the creative partnership continues in various forms, and we'll see what shakes out in the months to come.
Well, thank you for doing this with me.
Of
I
course.
love you too, and we love everyone listening, and I just want to put out a pitch
Mm,
that maybe we should just start a new genre
okay.
and write into that. I'm thinking bromantasy.
Okay.
Hear me out.
Go for it.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Frat Boy.
Okay. I like it.
And we are gonna get just a whole new, I think after we stop recording, we just should start spitballing.
Start spitballing. Good. Okay. So we'll have two projects in the hopper, is what you're saying.
Yes,
I like
yeah.
it.
But
Okay.
I have a good feeling about this.
I like
So
it.
stay tuned for our next podcast.
Beautiful. I like it.
The Bromantic Times.
The
Thank
romantic
you.
times. Very good. Very good. All right. Well, I will take us out officially. I do not have the script in front of me. This is a little bit fly by night, but if as best I remember, it goes something like this. Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg was created by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced by Bookwild Collective founder Kate Herget. Scott Leeds composed our theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo. Thank you all for listening, and it's been a blast.
It has been a blast, and I just want to say thank you so much to Kate
Yes.
for
Yes.
everything she's done,
Yeah.
production wise, and helping us every week with everything.
Yes. Huge,
You're the
huge,
best, Kate.
huge thanks to Kate. If anyone is looking for a gifted producer, Kate Herget is the person to go to.